Hi everyone, welcome to our top 10 games of 2013. So today Joanna and I are going to introduce you to our favorite games that were either new this year or new to us. Here they are in no particular order.
So my first game on my list is Tzolk'in. It is the only Euro game on my list. I don't pick Euro games very often, but this one was fantastic. I really like the spatial element to it. It's worker placement, but it's really interesting in that you sort of have to think ahead. It's got that geometric edge to it. There's so many different ways that you can win, which I really like. Yeah, it's come out quite a few times at my table. I'm a fantastic fan of the theme even, is great. It's very well realized, and I always find it wacky and fun, and everybody that I've played it with really enjoys it.
I was really impressed with the gear mechanic in the game when it first came out. It looked so hokey at first, but it works incredibly well, and it just adds so much challenge and so much complexity with throwing in that temporal aspect. It's just really, really interesting, and it's the first time I've ever seen somebody do something truly new with worker placement. I really enjoyed playing it the few times I have. It hasn't really hit my gaming table. My group is not so much into Euros at all, so I kind of have to sneak them in every once in a while, and I just haven't been able to get the mileage out of Tzolk'in that I would have liked to, because it really is such a strong game. So my first pick for this year is Goblins Inc. I'm a really big fan of those silly kind of disaster movie almost games like Galaxy Trucker and Robo Rally, where you spend the first half building something and then the second half watching it explode. And Goblins Inc. does that in a really, really well realized way. It's got this awesome team mechanic that just balances really well, adds a lot of really interesting communication challenges to the game, and it also means that the second phase where you're watching things play out, which is usually a problem for these kinds of games, because I find that, especially with ones like Galaxy Trucker, which I do love, you just kind of feel like you're sitting back and watching things go. With Goblins Inc., you're a really active participant in the destruction as well as the construction side of things, and it's just so much fun and so silly, and it's so completely engaging from start to finish.
I am also a huge fan of Goblins Inc. I love the comedy in it. There's been quite a few Goblins games that have been built recently, and they all have this wacky element to them with building and breaking things and goblins, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. I think one of the reasons why this game doesn't actually hit my table more often is because I never seem to be able to have exactly the right number of players you need to play this game well. It's really sort of a 4-player game. You can play it with 2, but again, I never seem to have that specific number of players around ready to play. But I do love the blow-em-up games like Galaxy Trucker and that kind of thing, so I should definitely see if I can get this one out a little bit more. So the second game on my list is a cooperative game, Flashpoint Fire Rescue. Just learned about it this year, and it's quite a new game. It's a lot of fun. I'm a huge fan of cooperative games generally, and this one is seriously challenging, which I love. I think cooperative games should be really challenging because it's really gratifying when you're working together with all these people and you succeed, and it's really difficult to succeed. And this is definitely one of those games. I also love the randomness, the explosions and the fire and this kind of thing. It really feels like I am in a burning building and it's falling down, and I love that. It also makes me feel like a hero because, you know, I am working for the fire department and saving people's lives, and I think it's a really unique, interesting game. It's not the kind of theme I would go for normally, so I think it's really well realized.
I agree. I think the theme is really well done, and it's a lot more fun than you maybe expect it to be. You're also absolutely right about the challenge. My group pulled this out, and we're seasoned RPG gamers. We've done a lot of challenging cooperative stuff, so we got cocky. And we decided we didn't need to play the beginning game. We didn't need to set it to easy or medium. We went right in on the hard level. We had hot spots everywhere. We had explosions to start, and we had the building collapse on us within 20 minutes. We tried it again, and exactly the same thing happened. So this is a great game to inflict on people who think they're really good at co-ops. The randomness, all of the different factors that you have to keep track of is a really great way of keeping people on their toes. And I found it a really satisfying challenge. So next up for me is what was one of the biggest games of the last year and a half or so, and that is the Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game. I'm a big fan of tabletop miniatures games in general, and I really tend to prefer these small scale skirmishy kind of type ones. So this is a game that very much falls into a genre that I already enjoy. I'm also a total sucker for Star Wars stuff. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an X-Wing pilot, so they may very well have designed this game for me. But it's really strong on its own merits, even if you're not a fan of Star Wars at all, and even if you've never played minis games. It does such a great job of making that genre accessible to people. Everything is pre-painted, pre-assembled, the components are gorgeous. It's really cheap for a minis game, given that you can play it completely for the 40 or 50 bucks to get started, and it works really well on that small scale. I love how expandable it is, and I love being able to get ships like the Millennium Falcon into the game, but I actually really enjoy playing it with the basic set as well. I think it just does a fantastic job of bringing new people to minis games and is a really fun tactical game in its own right.
I am also pleasantly surprised by this game. I really never played very many tabletop miniatures games, not because I don't find them really fun, but more because I just never had the time to paint them all and build them all, and it was great fun, but I just never had the time for it. Whereas this game, like you say, fantastic introduction to this sort of game, and the small scale skirmishy stuff is fantastic. I love the fact that you can take it out of the box and just play it. It's wonderful. I think I lean away from two-player games. I think this is the thing for me, is that I very rarely am in a situation where I want to pull out a game that's a two-player game. However, I am also a sucker for all things Star Wars, especially when you add something like Slave One and the Millennium Falcon to this game, so I will certainly keep it on my shelf, and I'm going to try and bring it out a little bit more often in future. So speaking of two-player games, there is a two-player game on my list, even though it's not the kind of thing that I usually bring out. This one is fantastic, and it's Dungeon Twister Prison. I've played Dungeon Twister quite a bit over the years, but they brought out a new version, and this game is gorgeous, and they've really upgraded it and made the art more beautiful, and I really like it. I love, again, the spatial element of this game, the sort of thinking ahead and the geometric aspect of it. It's almost like pure strategy. It's kind of like chess in a dungeon. I'm a huge fan of it. I always bring it out whenever I can, and I'm really glad that they're bringing out new versions of this game. I think it's fantastic.
Dungeon Twister was an interesting one for me because I'm actually a big fan of two-player games. I play a lot of them, and I'd heard a lot about this game, that it was good. You'd told me about it a couple of times, and it was just not something I ever got around to. And when I played it, I realized that it was a really fun game, and it really is quite unique in how it uses the dungeon, as well as the fact that there's no dice, there's no element of randomness to it whatsoever. It's definitely really interesting. I think the reason that it never has stuck with me since then is because I got claustrophobia first. And Claustro is one of my favorite games. I brought it up in last year's top 10, and it's a different game. It's a little bit more of a tactical minis game, but it very much fills that two-player dungeon crawler niche for me. And I think Dungeon Twister would have had a much better chance if I hadn't picked up claustrophobia first. So to switch gears completely from two-player dungeon crawlers, my next choice is River Dragons. This is a family game that I think does absolutely everything right. It's got beautiful art, the components are fantastic. I love the little miniatures that they have. They're really nicely detailed. They've got a lot of character. There's a nice mix for boys and for girls, and they're also too big for a small child to swallow. So this is something that you can safely play with kids that are quite young. I've actually played it with a 3-year-old before who did very well. He managed to get some strategy in. He was having a great time, and he could just kind of play around with the planks when he was bored. So it works incredibly well with young players. I've also played it in groups of adults only, and we had a blast as well. It's quite cutthroat and tactical, especially if you flip it to the side where the rocks aren't pre-painted and it's a little bit more challenging. I find it's a game that's just really engaging for a huge range of age groups, and it means that it can find a place on pretty much anybody's shelf.
I am also pleasantly surprised by this game. It is beautiful, first off. The art is so gorgeous, and it's so well put together and bright. I really like it. I think one of the reasons that I don't play it very much is I find it fiddly. It's one of those things where it gets past it because it is a really nice game, and I love it when you do play that advanced side where you can go anywhere on the board and you do end up completely double-crossing everybody, and it's a very competitive game. But I do find that we've had a few instances where people have nudged the table and everything has gone over, and it's just been so frustrating to put it back together again. But if you can get past that, and I never thought of playing it as like a kid's game with little kids, that's a fantastic idea, because it's pretty much sort of language independent as well, I believe. So that's a really great idea for sure. I think it might excel best as a family game. So my next game is a little bit of an older one. Cosmic Encounter came out in the 70s. I never got a chance to play it, but over the past year I've had a chance to play it, and it is amazing. Fantastic game. I always expected it to be a really hefty game with a lot of rules and a lot of stuff to memorize and a lot of pieces, but it really isn't. It's quite dependent on the social aspect. It's a lot about talking to each other and about negotiations. And it's different every time you play it, because not only is it different because you're playing with different people, but also every alien race that you draw changes the game so much to the point where sometimes it's doesn't even feel like the same game anymore. It's quite amazing. So I've always had a really good time playing this game. And I'm very excited to keep playing it because it seems like it's never going to get old.
Yeah, I mean, especially not with all the expansions. There's so much going on in this game, and you're absolutely right in just how dramatically the different cards can change things. I really like pure negotiation and kind of social games, so this is definitely right up my alley, but I almost found that there was too much going on with some of the cards. There are a few where you just have to change your tactics completely. The way that you've been playing for ages no longer functions at all. And while that's exciting and interesting and challenging, it can also be really frustrating if you're looking for something a little bit lighter. I think that this game is really interesting and unique, and I'll probably end up playing it again, especially because the components are just beautiful. But you do have to be in the right mood for it, and you have to have a pretty high tolerance for frustration and conflict. So next for me is the second two-player game on my list, which is Hive. I fell in love with this game. It's gotten the most playing time out of, I think, any of the 80 or so games that we've reviewed in the past 2 years. I've got a pocket edition of it, and it actually came traveling with me and my boyfriend to Europe this summer, and it was great. We played it on the plane, we played it on the train. There were no automobiles involved, so we couldn't play it in the car, just to round out that trifecta, but we were playing it in the garden, and we introduced some of my family to it, and he doesn't speak Polish and they don't speak English, but we were still able to communicate through this game. It's got some of the fantastic strategy and longevity that you would get out of something like chess, but I find it much more engaging. There's something much more organic about the movement, the way that it moves back and forth across the table, the way it's not locked into a board, just makes it so much more appealing to me, and I love it.
And I can't say anything bad about this game at all. I love this game. I think it's done incredibly well. I love that dynamic movement, and the components are amazing. Those nice hefty tiles, whether you get the travel edition, the pocket one, or the main game, it's beautiful stuff. And the art is gorgeous. Yeah, I find it a really, really fantastic strategy game that you can take anywhere, and it's a lot of fun. And it's probably pretty cheap too, I think. So it's definitely one of my favorite games for sure. No disagreement here. So the final game on my list is my silliest game on the list, King of Tokyo. Now, King of Tokyo is probably my favorite push your luck dice game. There's a lot of them out there, but this one I think does it right. There's a lot of really great elements to it, but there's also some neat strategy thrown into that silliness. You get to play a monster and you get to smash a city, which is always great, but there's also some interesting cards in there. There's some neat mechanics where you really have to think about exactly what you're doing and when. I really think it's a nice game. It's a little more than a filler for me. I feel like it's a step up maybe from a filler. It's probably a little bit more expensive than a filler as well, but I think it's worth it. I think all of those mechanics are so tight and done so well and packaged in this really hilarious theme, and I always have so much fun with this game.
I absolutely agree with you on the theme. I am in love with the art in this game. It's so silly. It's got that perfect balance between cartoony kind of over-the-topness and a real sense of menace and monstrousness that they absolutely knocked it out of the park for this one. I think it's the perfect package for this game. It doesn't hit the table quite as often with me as I think it should, and that's maybe because I don't quite think of it as a filler. The way that it works for you, where it's kind of a filler plus, for me, I feel like I either want a full game or something really fast and light, and King of Tokyo is sometimes uncomfortably in the middle. I think I also feel like the expansion power-up is absolutely essential to play with, and it soured me on the game just a little bit that didn't come included with it, because it just adds so much to the game, and you really wish that they'd just thrown it in there right off the bat. So my final game is Firefly, and there's a part of me that's a little embarrassed by this and that it's totally not the kind of game I would normally go for. It's very fanish. It's totally designed for people who love the series, who love the movie, who love the characters, and I'm definitely one of those. I don't usually go for these kinds of experience games. You know, for me, I think this fills a similar niche to what Arkham Horror does for a lot of other people, in that it's about immersion in a world and an atmosphere and a set of characters and just a setting that you get to go and play around in for a few hours. With Firefly, this is especially the case because it's kind of a sandbox game. You can spend a few hours tootling around just doing jobs for people and completely ignoring the fact that the game actually has objectives. And I normally wouldn't enjoy that. I like my games to be very focused, to be quite strategic, and to have very clear conflict or objectives in them. This game doesn't really offer that, but it does such a beautiful job of conveying the theme, and it's so inviting and so exciting that I keep wanting to go back and play it, even as a solo game, just because I want to go back to that world. And I think it does such an amazing job of conveying that it's really worth pointing out.
Firefly, I don't think you need to be a fan, actually. I think that it's a great game, even if you're not a fan of the world. I think it's, well, first of all, the components as well, absolutely fantastic. The detail that went into the making of this game is amazing. The money, the backs of the cards, the text, it's all so specific and beautifully done. I think whoever made this game was a huge fan of the game, but also was a huge fan of making board games well, and it's just the detail involved in it. It's so fantastic. I think the reason why it doesn't really hit the table on my gaming nights is because I am one of those people who loves Arkham Horror. I am one of those people where if I want an immersive game that I really live in a world with a bunch of people for a while, that's where I go. So I go to the Lovecraft stuff. But I totally understand the appeal of a game like that, being able to wander around in a world and just sort of mess around for several hours, really. Firefly, you can spend several hours wandering around, just as you can spend several hours wandering around in any sandboxy game. So I think it's incredibly well-made game for sure. And that was our top 10 list for 2013. Thank you so much for watching. We do have a few more episodes left this year, so keep checking out the channel. We also have a very special episode coming up, which is a live playthrough with some special guests for sure, so make sure to look at that one. And happy playing. We will see you next year.